Hey all, and welcome back to There's Danger Here. I'm Leilani, and today we're going to do a case out of Texas. So, let's get into it, shall we? On December 6, 1991, 17-year-old Jennifer Harbison and Eliza Thomas were working at I Can't Believe It's Yogurt shop in Austin, Texas. On the way to work, Jennifer dropped off younger sister Sarah and their friend Amy at the mall, which was just about a block away. After the two were done shopping, they walked back over to the yogurt shop to wait for Jennifer to finish her shift and get a ride home. Jennifer and Eliza were set to close the shop that evening, something they had done many times before. Just before midnight, homicide detective John Jones received a call on the radio. The first radio transmission was a fire at the yogurt shop. Detective John requests clarification on why he's being called, as, again, he's a homicide detective. The secondary report is that it was a robbery homicide with 3 dead on site. As he was pulling in, police confirmed the presence of a 4th victim. When he arrived, the fire department was at the front of the shop, continuing to work on the smoldering remains of a fire that was within the shop. John entered via the shop next door, and as the smoke cleared, he noted 3 young women in one area and 1 other young woman close by. They were all nude, tied up with their own underwear as bindings, and shot in the head. Amy, the one farthest from the group, had been shot twice. Rather than have the medical examiner take them away, homicide investigator Mike Huckabee and Detective John managed to keep them on the scene until the Department of Public Safety, or DPS, got there. This was when DNA was new, and that's the party that would complete sexual assault swabs before the bodies were moved. The manager was called. 24-year-old Reese Price was called and notified of a fire and the 4 victims. Police asked for her to come to the shop, and she did. Upon arrival, police asked if she could identify the bodies, and Reese thought it would be better for her to do it than the families, saying it was the right thing to do. Reese entered and stated it was dark. They headed to the back as water dripped on them. She then said, quote, "There wasn't anything to identify, so they didn't have faces. There was no clothing. Fire is very destructive. It's not forgiving," end quote. After that, the 4 girls were loaded up by the medical examiners. They went through the scene, and Reese went through the closing process with investigators, noting the key was in the front door, which was standard for them as they were about to close. But about half of the back of the shop was cleaned, so they were close to finished, but not done. Reese believed that all 4 girls were helping clean and get ready, that often when it was time to close, the front door was locked, and customers, if they were in the shop still, were allowed to remain. And Reese said that even though it was work, the girls seemed to have fun. They would play music and dance. Evidence was difficult to find. Fire had done quite a bit of damage, and water to put out the fire did the rest. Soot sat everywhere. While police attempted to get fingerprints, it was impossible, even on the open cash register, to which Detective Jones and Huckabee asked about how much was typically in the register. That information was held close to the chest throughout the investigation, and for good reason. A .22 was used to shoot all the girls. The .22, according to Detective Jones, is soft, making it impossible to get prints and information on, but the .380 was also used on Amy, and the bullet was found preserved in the drain nearby, showing the lands and grooves and exactly what weapon was used. That allowed officers to determine the gun they were looking for. Eliza's sister, after hearing the news, said, "There's no Sonora without Eliza." Jennifer ran track, while Sarah played basketball, and both were involved with Future Farmers of America, or FFA, raising sheep. Amy was touted as being born in a saddle. She was great with animals. When the family moved to Austin, she was also involved with the junior FFA, and that's where she met Jennifer and Sarah. Her older brother Sean said that when she was born, he got everything he wanted because he wanted a little sister. Bob, Her father said that when he thinks of Amy, he thinks of horses. That if he was having issues with a colt, he'd stick her on them for a couple days and then wouldn't have any problems with him. She just had a way with animals. Pam, Amy's mother, called her an old soul. Maurice Price, a 16-year-old, went to North Cross Mall a week after this happened with a .22 and extra bullets. Walking around the mall with it, police were notified and Detective Jones was called. Morris stated that he had picked up his friend, 15-year-old Forrest Wilburn, on the night of the murder. Maurice stated that the two went to the mall together, and Forrest asked to see his gun, and then around 10:45 p.m., they got split up. Maurice went on to say he waited until 11:05 when he met up with Forrest again. Forrest was sweaty and smelled of hairspray and said he did something. Then later, the two would meet up with Robert Springsteen and Michael Scott, stealing a car and joyriding. Maurice went on to say that Forrest claimed to have killed the girls. The police got him to wear a wire and speak with Forrest on December 15th. Maurice tried to lead him into admitting it, but Forrest said that he wasn't serious. He was joking about the whole thing. When police spoke with Forrest later, they say it was clear he wasn't smart enough to have committed the murder and not say anything to them. 3 weeks later, the parents of the slain girls made a public statement. They request help solving the murder, but nothing comes. Police did anything and everything they could think of to try and solve the murders, including some unorthodox techniques. At the funerals, undercover police officers were sent, just in case someone walked up to the family in an attempt to apologize. Police searched and followed up on every ticket in the area that night. They went through receipts and spoke with anyone who was there. They even hypnotized people that were in the shop that night, ending up with a couple composite sketches. To accommodate all the investigation on the scale that they were having, the Austin Police Department developed a task force dedicated solely to solving this case. Government agencies, including the FBI, were called in to assist. The task force supervisor, Senior Sergeant Hector Polanco, was brought in to help with interrogations, as Detective Jones said that wasn't his forte, and so they had to bring in someone who was touted as being the best. But by 1992, Polanco was reassigned after allegations that he coerced several confessions. The original detectives on the case report he likely did more damage than even they could understand through the use of these confessions. Oftentimes, people confessed, but had incorrect information, including that pesky amount of money stolen from the yogurt shop, which, again, the detectives refused to divulge to Polanco. At one point, 342 people were listed as suspects, leading to, again, this massive undertaking. Call centers were in place and informed about just about any and all rumors and theories, which at this time included satanic cults, white supremacist activity, and stuff like that. As a result, goth kids and metalheads were targeted due to the overwhelming information from the call center. SWAT teams were called in almost daily. Finally, 10 months after this occurred in October 1992, a new confession was obtained. 3 men charged with an unrelated kidnapping and rape case in Mexico were arrested when a man named Savandra, aka the Terminator, confessed to the yogurt shop murders, naming accomplice Alberto Cortez as the other man who committed the murders. However, due to extradition process, they were set to be tried in Mexico rather than the U.S. But when the detectives on the American side finally received the confession, they stated there were glaring inaccuracies. The caliber of the gun was wrong, and they said they poured white gas everywhere, which simply didn't happen. Later, Sabadra stated he was beaten and authorities threatened to hurt his family if he didn't simply sign the confession. After this, the case goes cold. Then, in 1999, a new team of investigators, the Yogurt Shop Task Force, were tasked with taking a fresh look at this old case. The task force interrogated 4 subjects that had initially been identified as possibly being involved. No surprise, it was Maurice Pierce, Robert Springsteen, Michael Scott, and Forrest Welborn. During the interrogations, Robert Springsteen and Michael Scott end up confessing and both implicated each other in the murders. Forrest Welborn and Maurice Price refused to confess. And remember, Maurice is the one that kind of brings them all together originally. At the time, the task force theory was that Welborn waited outside in the car as a lookout. Forrest never confessed once again. And so, after this, all 4 men were arrested and charged with capital murder, but charges were dropped against Maurice and Forrest due to lack of evidence when grand jury looked at it and decided they're not going to indict. Robert Springsteen and Michael Scott both went to trial based on their confessions. During the trial, each other's testimonies were either read or parts of the interrogation were played for the court as part of the evidence against one another. As a result, they were both found guilty on each other's confessions, again that implicated one another. Michael Scott received life without parole, and Robert Springsteen received a death penalty. During the appeals, their sentences were overturned, citing the Sixth Amendment that gives the defendant the right to confront their accusers, and in Scott and Springsteen's trials, their confessions were used against one another, but they weren't allowed to question each other in court. They weren't there. They refused. This appeal was about 6.5 to 7 years after their original conviction. And this was a good win for appeals. If you look back at the quote-unquote confession tapes, all you see is the detectives leading witnesses to garner a confession. It's pretty pathetic at points. At one point, one of the boys is asked how he tied up the girls, and he got it wrong multiple times. Once saying a rope, once saying shoelaces, and both times detectives tell him not to lie. So he changes what he says until he finally says clothing, to which detectives say, "Oh, finally, we're getting to the truth," clearly leading on this witness. It's absolutely insanity that it wasn't called out to begin with, but here we are. Looking back at their confessions, the inaccuracies weren't detailed. The many, many things they got wrong compared to what they got correct. It's pretty fucking stupid. At one point, they even the prosecution brings in this expert witness that changes where the fire originally started, as one of the boys confessed that they lit the girls on fire. However, original experts that had come in said it started in the cabinets first and then spread towards the girls. But this secondary expert that they brought in for trial said it maybe could have started on the girls. So they're changing their narrative to fit the confession. Roseberry Lemberg, the Travis County, Texas district attorney at the time, wanted to go ahead and go for a retrial in order to bolster their case because they realized that testimony alone wasn't going to be enough this time. The state decided to complete DNA testing called YSTR testing. At the time, it was a way of searching for and extracting male DNA only out of samples. Fairfax Lab processed the swabs from the sexual assault kit and developed a 16-marker unknown YSTR profile. All 4 of the original suspects were excluded as contributors for the unknown YSTR profile. Still, prosecutors were determined to retry Springsteen and Scott. And if you think that sounds ridiculous, it is. At the point that DNA excludes the men, it is likely that they weren't involved, yet the DA office was like a dog with a bone, unable to give it up. It just can hamper further investigation and the truth when their eyes are focused on one piece and they miss the whole fucking picture. Luckily, in 2009, the charges were eventually dropped, and after almost a decade, the duo were released. Then, in 2022, APD Detective Daniel Jackson was assigned to the case of the yogurt shop murders. Detective Jackson met with several subject matter experts on DNA and genealogy, and a tiered list of items from the scene were identified for potential retesting. In June of 2025, Detective Jackson also determined that the 380 that Amy was shot with had not been submitted into their NIBIN system in many, many years. So he put it back in the system, and within a month, a quote unquote hit to an unsolved murder in 1998 in Kentucky was identified. So now we have a link. In August of 2025, Detective Jackson requested a YSTR keyboard search from all labs in the US that kept YSTR profiles. They found several labs on the manual search, but with only 16 to 17 markers out of the current 27 marker profile. The South Carolina State Lab was the only one that found a complete 27 allele YSTR match to the unknown YSTR profile from the yogurt shop murders. The results were reviewed for accuracy by the South Carolina Legal Department before the profile was then released to the APD. On August 22, 2025, Detective Jackson received the South Carolina lab report that linked both of these YSTR profiles to each other, and also from a 1990 Greenville, South Carolina sexual assault and murder. The profile belonged to known serial killer and rapist Robert Eugene Brashers, who was born on March 13, 1958. Quote, Amy's final moments on this earth were to solve the case for us, end quote, Detective Jackson said at a press conference, according to the AP. Quote, it is because of her fighting back, end quote. Before the yogurt shop murders, Brashers had served time in prison for shooting a woman, and he was granted parole in 1989, Jackson said. DNA also linked Brashers to multiple, quote, unsolved murders and sexual assaults across the country, end quote. Quote, he's good for sexual assaults and murders throughout the 90s that he never had to stand trial for, end quote. DNA and other evidence have linked him to violent crimes in Missouri, South Carolina, and Tennessee, including the 1990 strangulation of a South Carolina woman, the 1997 rape of a 14-year-old girl in Tennessee, and the 1998 murders of the Missouri mother and daughter. Unfortunately, Brashers died by suicide in 1999 after a standoff with officers, police said. The gun he used to kill himself was the 380, also used to kill Amy. After being told of the final case break, relatives of the victim spoke at a press conference. Sonora Thomas, sister again of Eliza Thomas, said, quote, I now know what happened, and that does ease my suffering, end quote. Barbara Wilson, mother of Jennifer and Sarah Harbison, stated, quote, we never wanted anyone to go to jail or be charged with anything that they didn't do, end quote. She also said, quote, vengeance was never it. It was always the truth, end quote. And with that, the almost 34-year-old case goes from being unsolved and cold to solved. Unfortunately, this doesn't solve any of the hurt feelings from the families or what happened to these girls. And here we see another case of how there are multiple victims, not just those that are murdered. And what I mean by this is we have to include, of course, the 4 girls that tragically lost their lives. But then we have 2 gentlemen that were coerced into creating confessions and lost nearly a decade of their lives as well, increasing that number to 6. When you want to think about their families, the numbers start to increase exponentially on who is affected by these murders. And with that, that's the end of the yogurt shop murders. Remember, to all those out there listening, be careful. It's a dangerous world we live in.